Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and this evening I finished reading Vengeance is Mine by Mickey Spillane, the third of the Mike Hammer novels. And it was mediocre. I the Jury is really solid. And My Gun is Quick, the second one, is pretty good. Vengeance is Mine is a middling effort. I think of all the Mike Hammer books I've read, this probably ranks as the weakest of them. It exemplifies a couple of Spillane's strongest attributes and then throws that right up against probably his two weakest attributes. One of which is that he can sometimes feel like he just dashes off the work. The Jury was famously written in like fewer than 3 weeks, the entire thing. And Vengeance is Mine, I don't think it was written at some like hyper speed. And there are plenty of great writers who write extraordinarily quickly. Spillane himself had already done that. But sometimes there are aspects that just feel rushed. For example, there's this scene where we're in New York City. Hammer's a private investigator in New York City in the 1950s, for the most part, into the 1960s, who, he was once a cop, and he can't be bound by the structure and the rules that the cops have to play by. So he's a private investigator, and he goes and finds the killer and takes care of business. He lies, withholds information, shoots, bullies, bulls, fights, wrestles, lies, seduces, lies, drinks, withholds information, lies his way through all the situations to get to the end and find the killer on the last page. And then he usually kills the killer. But the writing has the positive thing is it has this staccato style that James Ellroy famously called it like telegraph writing, where it's just bang, 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 and it works. It's good. It's well done. We get lines like it's great. Everything was so white, covering up so much filth, the snow. Nature doing its best to hide its own. So you have like some really wonderful lines in here. And the action is always top notch. Like it feels like Spillane would sit there and figure out the actual choreography of the fight and then represent it in fiction. And he does a decent job. As an example, at first I thought I wasn't going to get in. Then the lock clicked and the door swung in just a little. Sometimes you get just enough warning. Some reflex action shoves you out of the way before you can get your head split open. My hand went up in time to form a cushion for my skull, and something smashed down on my knuckles that brought a bubbling yell up out of my throat. I kept on going, dived and rolled, so that I was on my back with my feet up and staring at the ugly face of an oversized pug who had a billy raised ready to use. He didn't go for the feet, but he didn't think fast enough to catch me while I was down. I'm no cat, but I got my shoes under me in a hurry. The billy swung at my head while I was still off balance. The guy was too eager. He missed me. I didn't miss. I was big, he was bigger. I had one bad hand and I didn't want to spoil the other. I leaned back against the wall and kicked out and up with a slashing toe. And so there's the actions there. And the other aspect of the book that really works is that Velda, who is Mike Hammer, who's originally Mike Danger for the comic books, and then he became Mike Hammer for the novels. You got to be a little more serious when you're in print, in a book, not a comic book. So Velda is Mike Hammer's secretary, and she, as the series progresses, becomes more and more influential. She's intelligent. She's capable. She can plot out around and entrap the bad guys with Mike. She's also good though in a tight spot. So she has her own PI license. She has a gun. She can use it. She doesn't always need to be rescued, and that's a good aspect to the writing. Especially this is most of these are published in like the 1950s, so that's a positive aspect. On that other side though, there's always this tendency within Spillane to have this like violence towards women. Some of it can be somewhat graphic too, and it comes off to me in the way that sometimes some of Stephen King's work does, where he has bad things happening to kids, and we get an emotional response, but our emotional response is not matching what I would regard as the imaginative creation or the imaginative response that maybe the writer's going for. I think it just feels like overused and overdone. And so that's true in pretty much all of his books, but it's true in Vengeance is Mine. It's famously true in I, the Jury. And some of the violence from I, the Jury actually pushes forward into this, the third book, and haunts Mike Hammer. Like he can't kiss certain women because they remind him of women from his past, or he doesn't want to do something because of people who've been hurt before. And so we have that sense, kind of this sense of guilt from the violence. I kind of regard Mickey Spillane as the R-rated crime novelist. If you're not in the U.S., the films that are rated R, you have to be 17 or older to be able to buy your own ticket and go in. If you're under 17, you have to have a parent or guardian who can buy your ticket and go see the film with you. And so they're usually more violent. The language is foul. There might be sex, things like that. And Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett might be sort of the first rated R crime novel, but I don't think Hammett did that across the board. Like Maltese Falcon is not rated R. The Thin Man certainly is not. Thin Man is like PG practically. So Spillane, all of those Mike Hammer books, they feel like they're rated R. The other aspect of this that just like doesn't work, and maybe it worked in 1950, I don't know, is there's this out of left field bizarro bit where there's this like homophobic attitude that Mike Hammer has. So he and Juno, who runs this modeling agency that might have had a model who knew something about his friend who got killed, they go out to a restaurant, like bar, where that she's heard like has the best steaks, and they go there and it turns out to be a gay bar. And we get this description of Mike Hammer having to like, you know, give dirty looks to all the men who are kind of giving him like a, you know, a curious look. And Juno has to, you know, kind of like fend off a look from a woman who's there. And it's just like it's not the methinks, you know, just protest too much business, but it's just bizarre. What's weird is Spillane almost Hammer, but maybe Spillane to a certain degree as the writer is creating this situation where we're supposed to see these other characters as like bizarre and other, and it's his attitude and this like whole like stagey scene that comes across as being so bizarre and unnatural. And so there's this, it's published in 1950, there's some weird homophobia, and it jumps up in a particularly bizarre way towards the end, and I don't want to spoil anything, but that's the part that leaves a very sour feeling as a reader. So I highly recommend I, the Jury. Vengeance is Mine is one to wait until you've read plenty of the Mike Hammer books and you're like, okay, I want to read another Spillane novel. Then do Vengeance is Mine. As an example, though, of what he's capable of in a good way, here's a car scene. The address was right on the fringe of the village in a section I knew pretty well. I went back to the car and crawled down Broadway. 20 minutes, 15 now, Tempest Fugit's fast as hell. 12 minutes, it started to snow harder. The wind picked it up and whipped the stuff into parallel, oblique lines across the multicolored lights that lined the street. Great line. Red lights. I made like I was skidding and went through. Cars honked and I cursed back, telling them to be quiet. The gun under my arm was burning a hole in my side and my finger under the glove kept tightening up expectantly. 14th Street went by and two cabs were bumper locked in the middle of the road. I followed a pickup truck onto the sidewalk and off again to get around them. A police whistle blew and I muttered for the cop to go to the devil and kept on my way behind the truck. 5 minutes. My teeth were making harsh grinding noises I could feel through my jaw. I came to my street and pulled into a parking space. Another minute went by while I oriented myself and followed the numbers in the right direction. Another 2 minutes went by before I found it. And so it moves. Like, it moves. But again, not Spillane's strongest novel. So I highly recommend his first book, I, the Jury. Kiss Me Deadly was later filmed in the 50s quite well by Robert Aldrich, who did The Dirty Dozen. I think it's probably his most famous film. And his Kiss Me Deadly is a solid one. We see that's a later one, so Velda's even more prominent in that book. But Vengeance Is Mine is okay. So if you've read Mickey Spillane, you're like, what else could I read? Jim Thompson has sort of that He-Man sensibility. The Getaway is a pretty good book. If you don't think that Mickey Spillane is hard-boiled enough for you, and want your eggs burnt, like rock hard, then you should read Max Allan Collins, who famously did the Quarry books. And if My Camera is rated R, Quarry is probably rated like NC-17, or at that time rated X. They're in the 70s. And if Spillane is this bizarre art critic talking about the forms of women in their transparent gowns, Collins is going to tell us what happens right after that. And 15 minutes later. The other one that jumps out, of course, is Donald Westlake's pseudonym Richard Stark, who wrote the Parker books. This is the 7th. You can just see, like, this is a man who means business. Parker, of course, is a criminal. Hammer kind of is. Hammer's firmly on the line of, law and crime. Parker's crossed that line, and you feel like, hey, Richard Stark, Westlake writing as Richard Stark was kind of picking up a baton from Mickey Spillane in my mind with the Parker books. And they run into at least the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s. But they're quick reads. If you want a perspective of a crime novel with a perspective of a gay character that's not patronizing and weird and just a period piece, Looking for Rachel Wallace by Robert B. Parker, the Spencer novel, is a good example of a male detective without attitudes that just don't work. But I think it's also important to read some female crime novelists. So the Sjowall and Wahloo Martin Beck series is fantastic. I think in part because you have the husband and wife team working together to create these characters, the police procedural, the investigation. Swedish society is illuminated from their perspective together, not just one person's. Rosanna's the first book. It's not the best, but it's the first book, and so if you've never read those, I highly recommend it. There are plenty of female crime writers. Patricia Highsmith and Dorothy Hughes are two that jump out. Highsmith's in this volume, Hughes is in the 1940s one. They both jump out as women crime novelists who, I think Hughes especially was good at showing sort of the perspective for female characters within the books. They're not just sort of there to be used and rescued and, killed. And then there's the noir series. Now this one's tough because, with the exception of Phoenix Noir, home court advantage, I generally don't like these books. I think overall they fall flat. But within each of them, there's like 2 or 3 stories that are really good. And they bring such a diverse array of writers for each of these volumes that sometimes you can find a crime story writer or a crime novelist who is not just like this He-Man, stick 'em up. So read Mickey Spillane, maybe not Vengeance Is Mine, but again, just read what you want. Enjoy it. I'm Jack. Thanks. Bye.